Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are again in the heart of Europe, here in the European Parliament, and in today's programme we'll be discussing, does the threat of ISIS pose a greater threat than Iran with nuclear weapons? And in this programme today I'm joined by Thomas Sandel, who's the founder and director of the European Coalition and supporter of this programme. Also joined by Bas Bilder, great friend of Israel, and he's a Dutch MEP, and Paulo Casaco, who's a former MEP from Portugal and also one of Europe's leading experts on Iran. Firstly, Bas, can you share how your Christian faith has really shaped your politics here in the European Parliament?
I think that what is your moral foundation, especially your religious foundation, is very important, for that shapes the cause of your politics and your investment in politics. So to come to the core of the issue, I was raised by my parents with a deep love for the Jewish people in the state of Israel because of their wisdom came from the Bible. And they dearly loved Israel's God, and so also the Jewish people, and were very concerned about the survival of the state of Israel. So what I'm now doing is the parental heritage bringing into politics in the European Parliament.
Incredible, incredible. And Bas, you're serving on the very important and influential European Parliament's Committee on Foreign Affairs. You're also part of the delegation for the relations for Israel. What is your role and responsibility within these two committees, and how important is it that you're standing up for Israel here in the European Parliament?
As you just said about which threats are more imminent and more dangerous, I would say, as a former rapporteur on EU-Iran, that Iran is the long-standing and the most dangerous issue for not only the state of Israel, for you know that it is the sincere meaning and idea of the leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran to annihilate, to eject the state of Israel and all its inhabitants, the Jewish people, from the Middle East. Also, IS is also a big threat. But what I want to underline is that as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee and as a member and hopefully new vice chair of the Israel delegation, I would underline also this evening to the designated High Representative Mogherini, that there are close parallels between the security interest of the European Union, its 28 member states, and the security interest of Israel. We should recognize that very clearly. That means that in the common foreign European policy and defense policy, there should be a close eye on it and try to combine this interwoven interest in our policy. And that is very important, I think. When you are speaking about the threats, we should say that it is Iran, but also Iran's arms and helpers in the region, Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, all Islamist threats have all connections with Iran, and we should face this fact very clearly and to combat it. So what I want to have is a sincere recognition by Mogherini, by all European institutions, that the foreign policy interest, the survival of the state of Israel, has everything to do with the survival of the West and also the European Union.
Absolutely. Well said. And Thomas, I know that you've had a very successful trip in New York at the United Nations. Can you share with us your initiative that you've been driving through the United Nations, and that's to get the United Nations to actually recognise Yom Kippur as a religious festival within the United Nations?
Thank you, Simon. It's good to be back in Europe and back in the program with a little jet lag, but nevertheless. Because we had, as you said, very intense days in New York. We were there for 10 days. We organized a high-level breakfast meeting, the first one ever in the United Nations headquarters in honor of Yom Kippur. which fell on Saturday, last Saturday. And there are two things that we need to underline. One is that the Jewish people, again, are in a position where their holidays are not recognized. So whereas a Christian would not dream of attending an important meeting on, say, Good Friday, or a Muslim on Eid, for the Jewish people, and there's a good example going back 2 years ago, they had a very important meeting on the future of the Middle East on Yom Kippur, the most holy day in the calendar of Judaism. And of course, not a single Israeli could attend, which is the same for Rosh Hashanah and for other of the high holidays. So we have said that it's high time to bring justice to this question in the United Nations and declare Yom Kippur a UN holiday. And it's also a good way to reflect on the values that Yom Kippur is symbolizing, that is forgiveness and reconciliation. So we had a high-level breakfast for UN ambassadors in the UN headquarters, explaining more why we are pushing this initiative. So we had the ambassador from Rwanda speaking about what happened after the genocide in Rwanda, this process of healing and unification. We had former Deputy Director General of External Relations here at the European Commission, Ambassador Karel Kowanda, speaking about reconciliation today in international relations. All this to say that we had a private letter from Prime Minister Netanyahu sending his regards and endorsements for the event, and this is more important, from the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon himself, who in a letter wrote that this is a very important event in the United Nations, and he sent a private representative. So things are underway, and my hope and prayer is that already next year there would be an official United Nations Yom Kippur event in the UN headquarters in New York.
That would be something very special,
Yes.
so let's wait till next year. And Paulo Casaca, it's great to have you back on the programme. Can't believe it's almost a year since you were last on. So we know that you were a former Portuguese MEP and probably one of the leading experts in Iran here in Europe. So can you share with us some of the projects you've been involved in over the last few months?
Thank you, Simon, and it's really a pleasure for me to be here back with you, with Thomas, with Bastian Balder. My main project that I hopefully will be able to publicly launch within a couple of weeks is targeting Syria, where I think a lot of lack of information is really a big issue. And so Arch Humankind will launch with a Belgian citizen of Syrian origin a bulletin that will try to inform as much as possible what is going on. And of course this goes to what I think is the menu of the day for our debates, because Kobani apparently is in the process of falling. ISIS has already entered the town. It is really incredible how we came into a situation where ISIS has the tanks, ISIS has the night vision devices. The Kurds could not move during the night because they did not have the same technology. And for the first time, a Kurdish woman committed a suicide by bombing herself against an ISIS tank. And this should make all of us think of what's going on. Absolutely. To understand that the issue are not the means, are not what we used to call terrorism. The issue is this fanatic jihadist ideology that attacked Israel during the summer through Hamas, that is attacking very much on Syria and on Iraq. And as Kissinger just wrote that in his introduction to his new book on the international order, there is no real difference between Sunni or Shia jihadism. It's all the same. It's a very deep sentence of Kissinger that all of us, we should understand. It is the same, the Islamic Republic of Iran and its revolution started the whole of it. I mean, the creation of what we call now ISIS, that had really a lot of different names, but the most symbolic date was September the 1st, 2001, and this was created with the full support of Tehran. And so when we listen these stories of asking for Tehran to help to combat ISIS, it's lunacy what's going on. People do not look at history. I wouldn't say history, but very recent facts. People look at things like they would have just gone out of the sky yesterday. They did not. They have been prepared for a very long period. I was just before coming, I just put my eyes on the photo of the first beheading by ISIS. It was not called ISIS at the time. It was on the May 11th, 2004. And the photo is exactly the same as they do it now, 10 years ago. Yeah. And we look at them and, oh, that's a novelty, something new. It's not new. Of course, what's new is that it grew much stronger than it was 10 years ago. They are at the gates of Baghdad. They are in Abu Ghraib, which is at the gates of the city and within 2-3 kilometers from the airport. We have noticed that soldiers, Iraqi soldiers, do not dare anymore to go on the streets. They are already camped on their military facilities. And so that's the world we are in. And within all this time, you know, all the European and American policymakers seem to be very concerned about East Jerusalem urban development. You know, it's our leaders are completely out of touch with reality, and this is more dangerous than ISIS.
Yeah. Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yes.
When I may add something, for example, a new analysis from an Israeli expert on terrorism, Yoram Schweitzer from the International Institute of Security Studies in Tel Aviv, just wrote some days ago on clear evidence that during the Gaza conflict, ISIS-related groups were manifesting itself inside Gaza, inside Sinai. So it is the whole region that is at stake. Egypt, for example, is clearly threatened from outside and inside, and Sinai. The Islamists are on the Golan Heights, and we are speaking about Golan, Judea, Samaria, if nothing happened in the region. It is, I totally agree with your overview, and that is deeply worrying. That there is, I'm asking myself, do they ignore totally the facts? For example, you didn't touch upon it, but of course you also know it well. The devastating role of Turkey.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
In all what's happening in the region, with the AKP region, with the AKP government of Erdogan, and I can totally imagine the mistrust of the Kurds inside Turkey and outside Turkey, especially now in Syria with Kopani, towards this Turkish government.
Bas, we've seen really that this summer our news agenda has been completely dominated by ISIS. Particularly caught the attention of the world when ISIS defeated the Iraqi army and captured Mosul, and we saw the horrendous plight of the Christians and also the Yazidis. And it was only a few days ago that they chopped off the head of British aid worker Alan Henning. What role can the European Parliament play and the European institutions in actually defeating ISIS?
As a member of parliament, I should be very modest. For we have here hearings with the High Representative, but who has a real power are the member states. So the national parliaments are very in charge. What is here? The decisions made here with the council, and then elaborating them by the external action service of the High Representative Ashton and in the future Mogherini. What I've seen in the last years is that again and again during debates on Syria, I want Baroness Ashton, the High Representative, on all the jihadists coming from Europe through Turkey to Syria, what is coming to us and to recognize the big threat, the great danger of all the jihadist groups in the Middle East. And I didn't receive any clear answer. So a good friend of mine, he lived for 6 years in Damascus. He's an Arabist, a Dutch Arabist, and he saw what happened there with the civil war coming, and he has acquaintances through all the layers of the population. He is now living in Amman, so with him I try to have a clear sense what is going on in Syria and Iraq. But the big complaint, of course, is that Syrian Christians, Iraqi Christians are saying, do they have no responsibility, no heart for us in the Western world, in Europe? Where is our protection from outside? And there is no protection from outside. We hope that the Kurds will take this task, but they should be then given the right military technology, the right military backing. And as I said, the very dubious role of Turkey in this whole region. Turkey is playing cards with everybody, also with Iran. Yeah. Turkey did its best to undermine our sanction policies towards Iran.
And Paulo, just want to bring you here into this one. I mean, you just said in your opening introduction to the program, really, that ISIS has been around for well over 10 years, which is quite extraordinary to kind of most newsreaders and politicians. But it doesn't catch you by surprise. Can you share with us exactly the ideology of ISIS, how they were formed, and how they've become so powerful as a terrorist organisation and actually claiming a caliphate over Syria and large states of Syria and Iraq?
Well, ISIS has been always a part of the Al-Qaeda network, or if you want, of the Al-Qaeda cloud. Al-Qaeda itself, whoever read books on Al-Qaeda knows that it was not a uniform group. It was never a uniform group. It, at a certain stage, it was a bit like uniform, and it only got a lot of power exactly because of the big terrorist attack of September 11. Apparently, jihadists are absolutely crazy about big mass murder, and whenever there is a big mass murder, jihadists tend to rally around the assassin. And this happened after September 11, made bin Laden the indisputable leader of Al-Qaeda. And Zarqawi, that was killed in Hip in 2006 by the Americans, Zarqawi was a bit his successor. I think that the best book I ever read on the issue is really it is written in French. It is already published in 2005, and in 2005 it was obvious that the new leader of Al-Qaeda, of the new Al-Qaeda, was Zarqawi. That is the leader of what is now called ISIS. And basically it's the same. I mean, he's a Jordanian. He was brought up in prisons because he was, as most of these jihadists, he was a criminal, and he passes a very long time in Afghanistan, combating side by side with Al-Qaeda, and then he is, when the Americans finally go after Al-Qaeda after September 11, he is wounded, he escapes to Tehran, he's treated in Tehran, and from Tehran, he comes already in December 2001, he is in Iraq. And from then on, Iraq, Iran, Syria, he is maneuvering all the time to build the organization. And the organization is building up. There is a major event in 2004 when 4 different jihadi organizations come together under his leadership. And he gets his leadership exactly when he publicly makes the beheading of Nicholas Berg, an American hostage that they took on April the 9th. I remember that. I was there. I was there in Iraq, and I was very lucky not to have been an hostage at the time. And he was beheaded on May the 11th. And they grew immensely for several reasons. One of them is also because the Iranian-backed Iraqi forces behaved in a completely sectarian way towards Sunnis, and they were assassinating Sunnis, and they were making ethnic cleansing, and this pushed the Sunnis towards ISIS. The movement was reversed only in 2007 when finally the Americans, and mainly through General Petraeus, decided to bet on Sunnis to counter ISIS.
The surge.
It was well, they made a lot of emphasis on the surge, that is, on the 30,000 American soldiers there, but I don't think this was the main issue. The main issue were the Iraqis, because they financed. The organization was called the Sons of Iraq, exactly because ISIS was made for the most by foreigners. Europeans at the time already, there was an enormous ring in Italy, for instance. So this was everything that we are speaking about was already true 10 years ago. Now it's much bigger, but the essence was there. This 2007 movement was very successful because most of the Sunnis, they really disliked very much ISIS for obvious reasons. These guys are fanatics. They would kill somebody because he was smoking. They would force absolutely extreme sectarian policies. And people don't like them, as simple as that. They only come to them when they are forced. And so this was successful. But of course, when the Americans came out, and then we had Maliki making the same sectarian policy as before, everything reversed. Well, in the meantime, we have to take in consideration that the main logistic basis of ISIS from 2004 onwards was in Syria. Assad was supporting them, and I'm sure this was a direct instruction from Tehran. Tehran was essential to the formation of ISIS. ISIS was very important because it was making the war against the Americans. It was slaughtering all the liberal and democratic and secular Sunnis, which is also very important. Thirdly, it was saying to the Shias, well, if you do not go after our militias, the alternative is that you will be slaughtered by ISIS. So it was very successful. And it is a monster that it is very useful for Iran, of course, till it threatens Baghdad. And it is now threatening Baghdad. So then Iran says, okay, now we don't want you anymore, or we don't want you as powerful anymore, and we have to face you. But they created it in the first place. And to say that Iran should be an ally on the struggle against ISIS is completely lunacy. And even in Syria, Assad used ISIS to combat its opposition. It was Assad that put them on the street out of prisons, and he was very happy with it. The first time that they started really combating ISIS was very recently, it was in May, and for the same reasons, because for Assad it's very good that ISIS is slaughtering the Kurds, is slaughtering the opposition, but of course if it is threatening Damascus, well, then it's a bit too much. So there is a point where the things reverse. And actually we have seen this before in Pakistan, for instance. Who created the Taliban in the first place, and who sheltered Al-Qaeda? I mean, it was Pakistan. It was obviously Pakistan, and they played this role and got to the United States and say, well, please support us because we are combating them.
Not to speak about the interplay between Iran and the Taliban, of course.
Absolutely.
Drug smuggling and so on.
I think that could be for another program because we could get in real depth there. But thank you so much for your analysis.
Summing up, if you allow me, Simon, just a sentence to say. Well, all the jihadis, Shias, Sunnis, and even within the Sunnis and the Shias, they have all a lot of differences among themselves. They do. And they quarrel a lot among themselves. But they are jihadis in the end of the day. And all of them, they threaten all our values and all we are caring for.
Absolutely. That's a superb. Sorry, can I allow just Thomas in on this one? Thomas, we're living in extraordinary days, aren't we, where, for example, Israel is forming a new strategic alliance with Arab states, such as Jordan, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia because of threat not only from Iran but also from ISIS as well. How concerned are these so-called moderate Arab states with the rise of Iran and ISIS?
Well, let me first say that in the company of Paolo and Bastian, I dare to speak in small letters. And I remember so well when Paolo was on the program some 1.5 years ago, and you spoke about the threat of ISIS and what was happening in Syria and Iraq, but it was still so much under the radar. So I just want to give credit to those
absolutely.
that credit is due. What I could say is more a personal reflection. I just came back from New York, and the UN, the high-level meetings at the United Nations General Assembly are always under a lot of scrutiny and enormous apparatus of security. But this year, of course, the security was even higher than ever before, and because of one reason, ISIS. I happened to stay on the same floor in the same hotel as the Syrian delegation. So I could sense a little bit of the tension in the air, which only proves to say that ISIS, of course, is a threat to any civilized country. And that also includes the Arab states that you mentioned. And this is perfectly clear. What I would like to bring up, though, and I think it's important for us to name and shame, to use that tactics, because when you look at this coalition now, which is forming against ISIS, interestingly enough, who do you see in the coalition if not Qatar?
Absolutely.
And I'm asking myself, can you, eat the cake and still have it left? I mean, how can you be on both sides at the same time? And obviously the same goes without saying with Saudi Arabia and the funding which comes primarily from those two sources. So I believe that much more should be done also within the European institutions to put pressure on those states that are funding these terrorists. And obviously Qatar, I believe, is rather sensitive right now with the football championships, world championships coming up, and other. And of course, you may look at the role of Al Jazeera, which was supposed to be the beacon of light from the Arab world and the Arab Spring. And I think these are issues that we need to raise. ECI, of course, is not a military or even a political organizations, and that's why we speak with small letters when it comes to these issues. But nevertheless, I think there are things that we can all do by just being vigilant and naming and shaming those states which are behind ISIS.
No, absolutely. I think that's very important. And Bas, I want to bring you into this one really, and that's really on the silence of the international community, really in particular, looking at the plight of Christians in the Middle East, but particularly in Iraq this summer, who have faced almost ethnic cleansing from ISIS. The Yazidis have been, threatened with their extinction by ISIS, not even giving the Christians had a choice, I believe, to either to convert, to pay the jizya tax, or flee Iraq. And so we've seen a migration of so many Christians, and that's their ancient homeland in the Mosul area, have been there really for over 2,000 years, and yet ISIS wants to ethnically cleanse the Christians in the region. Why do you think that when it comes down to the plight of Christians in the Middle East, the international community is quiet?
You must know that already for years I'm visiting the Middle East. Also, I've been several times in the northern part of Iraq, in Kurdistan, and there I try to put on the agenda the plight and then I'm now speaking about several years ago, the very threatened position of Christian churches in Iraq, of course. And the Kurds again and again promised me that Christians were an enrichment of their regional government, and of course they are longing for a real state. That is obvious. But in general, to put it very plain, it is in this house already a battle, an uphill struggle to have freedom of religion really interwoven in our actual policy. Let alone we don't speak about more freedom of religion in the Middle East. Totally not. We are now speaking about the ejection of Christianity and other Yazidis and so on, Shabak and then Turkmen, from what we call one of the heartlands of Christianity. Therefore, it is. I cannot even the word shameful. It is. I think it is a real betrayal. It is a real betrayal of the Christians, Eastern Christianity. One of the cradles of Christianity and Eastern Christianity was from the time of Emperor Constantine the Great, the real source of the spiritual strength of Christianity for the West. We had to Christianize, for we were more pagan. And what we see, I cannot mention you any European institution, any European leader that says that what we need is real protection at the ground. And therefore I'm deeply concerned and even depressed when we look at the actual situation. We try to combat ISIS with airstrikes, while it is quite obvious when you will to annihilate them, to beat them, you should send troops on the ground. We know the United States don't want it. So what is the future of their threatened minorities, Christians and others, towards this big threat? Who is their help?
No,
what we are doing here, we must be honest. We are calling the member states to take actions. One of the last plenary debates I have seen quite openly that the grave situation, the deadly threat to Christians in the Middle East, especially in Syria and Iraq, is our responsibility. It's a political responsibility, and I mean it sincerely. But the power and the decisions lies with the government that form the Council, European politics. And when you look at the crisis we have in the eastern part of our continent towards Russia, we see a very weak Europe that has a common defense policy, nominal but not actual. So, and it is already for years. I can tell you, and I spoke with them, for example in Jordan, but also in Egypt. There is a deep disappointment, to say the least, as an euphemism, what's it called about the attitude and what we are thinking and about their situation. Are we fellow Christians? What are you doing for us? It is even a big debate, how many can we take them in when they are driven out?
No, absolutely.
Let alone to come to their help.
Yeah. And Thomas, I mean, sadly we saw really in the 1940s and the early 1950s the ethnic cleansing of the Jewish people from the Arab world, and now we're seeing the ethnic cleansing of the Christians from the Arab world. When is Europe going to wake up that it's our moral responsibility to protect those precious Christians, our brothers and sisters in Christ, who are facing persecution in the Middle East, and to raise this at highest level?
Again, it's a difficult question, and it's a question combined with a lot of shame, realizing that we do not learn from history. Also, I think it comes back to what Bas was saying earlier in the program. If you don't have a moral foundation, if moral is relative, nothing becomes important, nothing becomes worth fighting for. And I followed the debate of last week, I think it was last week here in the European Parliament, when there was a suggestion to say, well, maybe Europe should be responsible for a security zone in these areas where they could protect the Christian, not only the Christians, but the fleeing minorities. But this was not accepted on two grounds. One was to say that this would require troops on the ground, it's too expensive, it's too complicated. But the other one, strangely enough, it said it mentions Christians. And I think it's a reflection of something which is very sick in European culture today. And I think I would go one step further than what my good friend Bas, when he said that there's a problem in the European Parliament. I think it's even a type of racism. I think the impression that we have, or many people have in secular Europe, is that Christian is always a privileged white European. So a Christian, per definition, can never be persecuted. A Christian can never be threatened to his life. So, but when you look today at Christianity and you look at the global picture, a Christian is more often, you know, dark-skin colored, lives on the southern hemisphere, is poor rather than wealthy. And but I think this concept of Christianity is still connected in our minds to something which is connected with privilege, with wealth, with power, which is clearly not the case today in the Middle East. And I'm not sure what is needed to wake up the world, to wake up this European Parliament, to really see what is going on. Of course, you just have to watch the images on YouTube and you realize what we are letting pass on our guard. History will judge us very harshly, and we better take note in time.
Yeah.
May I add something?
Sure, go ahead.
Very short. 2 weeks ago, we had here a very interesting encounter with the Greek Orthodox priest from Nazareth, Gabriel Nadav, and he said quite clearly, and there were also members of the European External Service there. That was very important. I say, tell it to your boss, to the High Representative. There is only one place at the moment in the Middle East where Christians are safe. That is the Jewish state, Israel.
Amazing.
And what we are seeing is that is a recognition of this fact by Israeli Arabs, who are now willing to also to defend this state by going in the IDF. And that is another story that is not told here, but we should repeat it and also show the results and the facts.
No, absolutely. And Paolo, I just want to bring you onto this argument, looking at the security threat here in Europe. You know, it's believed, according to intelligence reports that have been leaked to the European media, that something like 7,000 young, impressionable European Muslims have gone out to join ISIS to fight both in Iraq and Syria. Surely these people pose a real security threat to Europe. What do you think's being done, or is anything being done to stop this radicalization that's radicalizing so much of the Muslim youth across Europe to join jihadist groups like ISIS to gain combat experience, come back to Europe and then pose a direct security threat to our security?
This movement has been going on steadily by at least the past 15 years. We have seen year by year bigger numbers of Europeans, most of them with some Muslim background, but more and more from time to time, some that do not have a Muslim background, being hired as jihadists. And nothing has been done. Well, regarding the Netherlands, I just read an article according to which the Minister of Defense was suggesting that it could be an idea that the Dutch army officers, soldiers, should hide the fact that they were in the army because of the threats of the jihadists. I mean that the soldiers of the Netherlands would become clandestine in their own country. So it shows to what extent did the West and countries, I would say countries like the United Kingdom, like the Netherlands, like Belgium and France have been perhaps the worst in this regard, that did not combat the jihadist ideology being nurtured into generations. This has to stop. I mean, this jihadist ideology is no better than the Nazi old ideology. It's the same. So we must combat it full-heartedly, and we cannot compromise. I mean, the tolerance of intolerance is intolerance. We have to understand this, and this is one of the objectives of the organization. This initiative I want to launch on Syria, to show the Europeans that, to start with, Syrians are not all jihadists. By all means, quite on the contrary. And unfortunately, the jihadism is growing, and we are not fighting against it. So we have to fight it here in Europe as well as in Syria. We have to help those who confront jihadism in Syria, in Iraq, the Kurds to start with, but not only.
Paolo, what's the danger if our European leaders and leaders of the member states across Europe don't take this seriously and don't actually challenge this radical evil ideology?
It will never stop. I mean, I think that at the back of their mind, many people, I think they think that we have nothing to do with it, and they would not come to Europe. But this is not true. They have been repeating that all the lands that were once Muslims should become Muslims again. So this is fairly clear, and there is a good part of Europe in the south and in the east that was Muslim in the past, but they would never stop there anyway. I mean, the jihadism is the biggest threat, immediate threat to all our values, and we have to combat it by all means, starting with education, starting to preventing them from financing universities and financing. I mean, when you look at the procession of French politicians to Qatar, I mean, it's so obvious. What does it mean? It means that the French political establishment, which is the most notorious, it's not only in France, it accepts to be subventioned by Qatar to be, and of course, in payment, they are just soft on jihadism. And they think it is very well. It's not. We are betraying ourselves, and we are betraying the Christians and everybody else in the Middle East.
Absolutely. I think, in my view, but from a Christian perspective, yes, we Christians are not a threat to them, to the secular elites here in my country and in the European Union. They have no idea about the ammunition, the crack powder of religion in politics. They don't have taken and don't still take Islam seriously in its combination with politics. For Islam doesn't divide between pure religion and politics. It is the same. You justly underlines that the concept of jihad, there were doctoral studies in the Netherlands that said jihad is the conversion by mind, by heart. Yes. But we know then you have no idea about Islamic history, about what the Quran and the Hadiths are saying. In short, to have a really knowledge of Islam, what is meaning, and especially jihad. We saw it with Hamas, and we still see it up to today for the victims of their own deadly politics are martyrs. What we are not speaking about martyrs in the European Union, but we see that there's a culture that is against us, clearly against. It speaks about martyrs. They have their life for combating us, to try to impose their Sharia on us. So the poisonous fruit of the secularization process in the Western world is that we are even blind to the threats that are deadly to our own culture. And there's a remedy. There's a remedy. And my remedy in my eyes is, from a Christian perspective, is this: read the Bible. Read the Bible. That is the truth. And Muhammad is not the seal of the prophets, but what we are seeing is this religion that has such a forceful upcoming in the Middle Ages, and were embattling Europe. Then it was from the outside. At the moment we see it from both sides, inside and outside. And we see it with the jihadists in Syria and Iraq. I spoke with Joram Schweitzer, the Israeli expert. He said to me, do you believe the territory of the Islamic State, of al-Baghdadi, the so-called Caliph, that is for them a safe haven? They get training, recruitment, ideology. They were totally convicted, and they come back. They can do several things. in a network or on an individual base, but they are a deadly threat to us. And the core of their behavior is religious. So what you should do indeed to compete with them, to take them seriously and to try to speak and to convince them that their ideas are totally wrong, firstly for themselves, for it is deadly, but also for the environment. But in my view, the real battle is a spiritual battle against these forces.
Absolutely.
But when you have no ideology, only liberalism, and that you think that you can solve such big problems and grave threats with dialogue, that is the famous word, dialogue, then you are lost.
Yeah.
But indeed, I totally agree. My main problem and my main objection to the secularists and to the liberals in this parliament and to the left in general is that they are betraying the fundamental rights of human beings and that they don't want to see the reality. For example, when you speak about the obnoxious role and the very wrong role of Turkey, a member of NATO, a candidate member of the EU, and you are trying to ignore it, then you are already lost, of course.
Yeah, of course. And Thomas, I want to bring you onto this one, particularly because you were in the UN last week and we need to discuss the threat that Iran poses. What did you make of the historic or foolish meeting between my Prime Minister David Cameron and his Foreign Secretary, together with the Iranian President Rouhani, in this thawing of relations between Iran and the West? Is the West naive in discounting Iran, the threat that Iran poses in terms of its nuclear weapons program, its sponsorship of international terrorism, and its horrendous abuse of human rights?
Well, Simon, you know, this process, as you may recall, started already last year at the UN General Assembly when Rouhani was suddenly the new kid on the block, the new star that people lined up to meet, and primarily trade delegations, because, you know, we have to face the facts. It's a trade issue, and most countries don't want to miss out on the trade with Iran. And of course, this year it was even more credible than ever before. The same hotel that I mentioned was also the hotel of Iran, so they had booked up half of the hotel, which only proves that their delegation was huge. And so obviously that was a great mistake. What I saw was also that there are, even in Christian circles, there are those who try to, as Bas said, engage in a dialogue where they even try to bring together Christian leaders with the Iranians. And I sat down with one of these leaders and I asked him, I said, well, as a European, you always ask yourselves the question, what would have been the right strategy in the late 1930s? Because we have the examples of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and we have the example of Frank Buchmann. Frank Buchmann, he led this Oxford movement, which had a great emphasis on really believing in the goodness of people, and said, well, if you only sit down and have tea with them, sooner or later you will agree and you will come to a conclusion, and these people will give their lives to Christ and this and that, and it will be peace. So Buchmann at the time, he met with Himmler and he met with his friends and just, you know, wanted to befriend them, hoping that they would change their hearts and change their minds. Whereas Dietrich Bonhoeffer, whom we all know, who ended up being killed in the concentration camps, he was a deep believer, but he came to a diametral different conviction, and that was the only Christian way to act in that situation was to try to assassinate Hitler. So of course, morally speaking, we are looking at very difficult dilemma, but this is part of European history. So I asked this person that I sat down with, I said, well, did you ever recall what was the right way in the late 1930s? Who had the moral conviction? I'm not in any way insinuating that, you know, we should be looking at ways of assassinating anyone, but what I think is that there is a great danger in this day and age with the spirit of appeasement that we sit down with the worst enemies of Western civilization, primarily and first and foremost the Jewish people, just to be able to establish trade. And I believe this is the same spirit that we had in the late 1930s, and we should be able to resist it. Knowing our history, we should be able to resist it today.
Yeah. Gentlemen, we've got 6 minutes left of the programme, so I've got a few issues to cover before we finish the programme. Paolo, look at my notes here. Isn't there a great danger that the international community, while it's focusing on the threat of ISIS, is ignoring the threat of nuclear Iran? Now, according to my notes here, a confidential report was obtained by Reuters this week that said the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, states that little progress is being made and that Iran has implemented only 3 of the 5 nuclear transparency steps which it was committed to completing before August the 25th under confidence building measures reached with the IAEA last November. So does this mean that the West doesn't see Iran as a nuclear threat and Iran with nuclear weapons as being dangerous to Middle Eastern security but also European security?
Well, absolutely, but let me just make clear that my opinion is that a dialogue with Islam is fundamental. We see right now in Kobani, for instance, that those who are giving their lives against jihadism happen to be Muslims, Kurdish Muslims. And I see that time and time again, and I see that jihadists look at the world as if we would be in the Middle Ages. But we are not in the Middle Ages anymore. We are in the 21st century.
Absolutely.
And I am seeing things in a completely different way. But getting back to your issue, I fully agree with you. The issue was never a technical nuclear issue. The issue is a jihadist, expansionist agenda from Tehran. So to say, well, we can accept a bit more of nuclear instead of you promoting so much ISIS, now that it's not very convenient for them to promote ISIS because ISIS became too big for their interests. It's a complete stupidity and only reveals the inability of our Western leaders to understand what is at stake. Of course, the nuclear issue is the fundamental, because when they will have a nuclear bomb and plus their terrorist squads, they will be unbeatable. As simple as that. Yeah. And we have to understand this.
Yeah, the big danger is that, and I smell it already, that the West, especially President Obama, for he is the powerful player here, not the European. The Europeans are following them. That a bad deal is better than no deal, and a bad deal, that is what the big fear is on the Israeli side. And what is very worrying, that is we are negotiating not on the essential of the issue, that is what we call in euphemistic way the possible military dimensions of the nuclear program of Iran, while it is quite clear that they have military dimensions. And Pachin, for example, and what I am reading now from Israeli specialists, Professor Askolai, for example, within half a year they can have 6 to 8 bombs via the way of uranium enrichment, of the plutonic way. And we are speaking about a bad way. I think that already for some years I have the very bad feeling that we think that we can contain a nuclear Iran just like we did the Soviet Union, but then we are totally ignoring the big difference between the Soviet Union and, as you said, Islamic Republic of Iran.
Yep.
Totally another agenda.
And Thomas, with about 2 minutes to go of the programme, maybe you can conclude the programme for us. I mean, President Obama's talking about wanting to get Iran to be a partner against ISIS in Iraq, and yet this seems to be the playoff between allowing Iran to be a new partner in this war against ISIS and will tone down your nuclear weapons program. But you met the Israeli delegation at the UN. How concerned are the Israelis now that Iran is even closer to acquiring and obtaining nuclear weapons?
Obviously, I think you all heard the speech of Prime Minister Netanyahu in the General Assembly, and he emphasized time and time again that the big threat, we cannot forget it, is Iran. Obviously, ISIS is a threat to everyone, including Israel. But as our gentlemen here in the panel have said, you know, nuclear Iran is something unthinkable that we just cannot accept at any price, and this should be a very clear message in this House, in the European institutions, that this is priority number one.
Gentlemen, I just want to thank you for joining me on this very lively and interesting European report. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme. Here we are in the European Parliament discussing key issues that are affecting not only the security and peace of the Middle East, but also European security. And it's important that as we see the rise and the tide of evil emerging out of the Middle East and also here in Europe, that we have the moral clarity to confront a nuclear Iran, to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, to confront this new dangerous Islamist organisation ISIS, and to ensure that we fight for our freedoms and our values of what's made Europe strong. So I want to thank you for watching today's European report.